Sienna God, hello all. Oshisahiya, good evening. And Wado, thank you for watching. So this is day 13, part A of Reading Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. An Inquiry into Values by Robert M. Persig. The truth was, he said, that he genuinely did want to know what they thought. Sorry. I'm like trying to listen to my son and my hamster because they're in there playing the video game because it's our daughter's birthday. And she is doing her training for her job, including like doing her CDL and all that kind of stuff. Like she is going to be driving a semi truck, which is really awesome. And so she is waiting to start the second half of her training. So she's not in the same town as us, city, whatever. She's like hours away. So we have to wait until we can meet up in order to celebrate. But we celebrated in our own way. And of course, we're playing a video game in her honor because that's what we did when she was here. We were gamers. Anyway, let's see. So I'm itching to get back, but I played my part because it's only like, we can't do a split screen 3 ways. We can only do it 2 ways with this particular game. So we have to like kind of share the controllers and whatnot. Alrighty, so let me start over because that was just boo-boo. The truth was, he said, that he genuinely did want to know what they thought. Not so that he could put a grade on it, but because he really wanted to know. They looked puzzled. I sat there all night long, one said. I was ready to cry. I was so mad, a girl next to the window said. You should warn us, a third said. How could I warn you, he said, when I had no idea how you'd react. Some of the puzzled ones looked at him with a first dawning. He wasn't playing games. He really wanted to know. A most peculiar person. Then someone said, what do you think? I don't know, he answered. But what do you think? He paused for a long time. I think there is such a thing as quality, but that as soon as you try to define it, something goes haywire. You can't do it. Murmurs of agreement. He continued, why this is, I don't know. I thought maybe I'd get some ideas from your papers. I just don't know. This time the class was silent. In subsequent classes that day, there was some of the same commotion, but a number of students in each class volunteered friendly answers that told him the first class had been discussed during lunch. A few days later, he worked up a definition of his own and put it on the blackboard to be copied for posterity. The definition was quality, as a characteristic of thought and statement that is recognized by a non-thinking process. Because definitions are a product of rigid, formal thinking, quality cannot be defined. The fact that this definition was actually a refusal to define did not draw comment. The students had no formal training that would have told them his statement was, in a formal sense, completely irrational. If you can't define something, you have no formal rational way of knowing that it exists. Neither can you really tell anyone else what it is. There is, in fact, no formal difference between inability to define and stupidity. When I say quality cannot be defined, I'm really saying formally I'm stupid about quality. Fortunately, the students didn't know this. If they'd come up with these objections, he wouldn't have been able to answer them at the time. But then below the definition on the blackboard, he wrote, but even though quality cannot be defined, you know what quality is. And the storm started all over again. Oh, no, we don't. Oh, yes, you do. Oh, no, we don't. Oh, yes, you do, he said. And he had some material ready to demonstrate it to them. He had selected 2 examples of student composition. The first was a rambling, disconnected thing with interesting ideas that never built into anything. The second was a magnificent piece by a student who was mystified himself about it had come out so well. What? Hang on. The second was a magnificent piece by a student who was mystified himself about why it had come out so well. Phaedrus read both, then asked for a show of hands on who thought the first was best. 2 hands went up. He asked about how many liked the second better. 28 hands went up. Whatever it is, he said, that caused the overwhelming majority to raise their hands for the second one is what I meant by quality. So you know what it is. There was a long reflective silence after this, and he just let it last. This was just intellectually outrageous, and he knew it. He wasn't teaching anymore, he was indoctrinating. He had erected an imaginary entity, defined it as incapable of definition, told the students over their own protest that they knew what it was, and demonstrated this by a technique that was as confusing logically as the term itself. He was able to get away with this because logical refutation required more talent than any of the students had. In subsequent days, he continually invited the refutations, but none came. He improvised further. To reinforce the idea that they already knew what quality was, he developed a routine in which he read 4 student papers in class and had everyone rank them in estimated order of quality on a slip of paper. He did the same himself. He collected the slips, tallied them on the blackboard, and averaged the rankings for an overall class opinion. Then he would reveal his own rankings, and this would almost always be close to, if not identical with, the class average. Where there were differences, it was usually because 2 papers were close in quality. At first, the classes were excited by this exercise, but as time went on, they became bored. What he meant by quality was obvious. They obviously knew what it was too, and so they lost interest in listening. Their question now was, all right, we know what quality is, how do we get it? Now at last the standard rhetoric texts came into their own. The principles expounded in them were no longer rules to rebel against, no ultimates in themselves, but just techniques, gimmicks for producing what really counted and stood independently of the techniques. Quality, what had started out as a heresy, jeepers. What had started out as a heresy from traditional rhetoric turned into a beautiful introduction to it. He signaled out aspects of quality such as unity, vividness, authority, economy, sensitivity, clarity, emphasis, flow, suspense, brilliance, precision, proportion, depth, and so on. Kept each of these as poorly defined as quality itself, but demonstrated them by the same class reading techniques. He showed how the aspect of quality called unity, the hanging togetherness of a story, could be improved with a technique called an outline. The authority of an argument could be jacked up with a technique called footnotes, which gives authoritative reference. Outlines and footnotes are standard things taught in all freshman composition classes, but now as devices for improving quality, they had a purpose. And if a student turned in a bunch of dumb references or a sloppy outline that showed he was just fulfilling an assignment by rote, R-O-T-E, he could be told that while his paper may have fulfilled the letter of the assignment, it obviously didn't fulfill the goal of quality and was therefore worthless. Now, in answer to that eternal student question, I was thinking about the people that are growing up with tablets, AI and whatnot. How do they fuel their creativity? Like, how do they use their imagination when it kind of seems like everything is like given to them, for lack of a better way of putting it? I mean, I'm pretty sure they're still having to do something, but and then also like the people who are competing with AI, because I was hearing about children who are just really gifted at writing and teachers are accusing them of using AI, right? So like how do they hold on to their creativity and their individuality without competing with AI? I don't know. Anyway. Okay, so quality and was therefore worthless. Now, in answer to that internal student question, how do I do this, that had frustrated him to the point of resignation, he could reply, it doesn't make a bit of difference how you do it, just so it's good. The reluctant student might ask in class, but how do we know what's good? But almost before the question was out of his mouth, he would realize the answer had already been supplied. Some other student would usually tell him, you just see it. If he said, no, I don't, he'd be told, yes, you do. He proved it. The student was finally and completely trapped into making quality judgments for himself. And it was just exactly this and nothing else that taught him to write. Up to now, Phaedrus had been compelled by the academic system to say what he wanted, even though he knew that this forced students to conform to artificial forms that destroyed their own creativity. Students who went along with his rules were then condemned for the inability to be creative or produce a piece of work that reflected their own personal standards of what is good. Now that was over with. By reversing a basic rule that all things which are to be taught must first be defined, He had found a way out of all this. He was pointing to no principle, no rule of good writing, no theory, but he was pointing to something nevertheless that was very real, whose reality they couldn't deny. The vacuum that had been created by the withholding of grades was suddenly filled with the positive goal of quality. And the whole thing fit together. Students, astonished, came by his office and said, I used to just hate English. Oh, excuse me. I used to just hate English. Past tense. Now, I spend more time on it than anything else. Not just one or two, many. The whole quality concept was beautiful. It worked. It was that mysterious individual internal goal of each creative person on the blackboard at last. I turn to see how Chris is doing. His face looks tired. I ask, how do you feel? Okay, he says, but this tone is different. We can stop anywhere and camp, I say. He flashes a fierce look at me, and so I say nothing more. Soon I see he's working his way around me on the slope. With what must be great effort, he pulls ahead. We go on. Fader's got this far with his concept of quality because he deliberately refused to look outside the immediate classroom experience. Cromwell's statement, no one ever travels so high as he who knows not where he is going, applied at this point. He didn't know where he was going. All he knew was that it worked. In time, however, he wondered why it worked, especially when he already knew it was irrational. Why should an irrational method work when rational methods were all so rotten? He had an intuitive feeling grown rapidly that what he had stumbled on was no small gimmick. It went far beyond. How far? He didn't know. This was the beginning of the crystallization that I talked about before. Others wondered at the time, why should he get so excited about quality? But they saw only the word and its rhetoric context. They didn't see his past despair over abstract questions of existence itself that he had abandoned in defeat. If anyone else had asked, what is quality? It would have been just another question. But when he asked it, because of his past, it spread out for him like waves in all directions simultaneously, not in a hierarchic structure, but in a concentric one. At the center, generating the waves, was quality. As the waves of thought expanded for him, I'm sure he fully expected each wave to reach some shore of existing patterns of thought so that he had a kind of unified relationship with these thought structures. The shore was never reached until the end, if it appeared at all. For him, there was nothing but ever-expanding waves of crystallization. I'll now try to follow these waves of crystallization, the second phase of his exploration into quality, as best I can. Up ahead, all of Chris's movements seem tired and angry. He stumbles on things, lets branches tear at him instead of pulling them to one side. I'm sorry to see this. Some blame can be put on the YMCA camp he attended for 2 weeks just before we started. From what he's told me, they made a big ego thing out of the whole outdoor experience, a proof of manhood thing. He began in a lowly class they were careful to point out was rather disgraceful to be in. Original sin. Then he was allowed to prove himself with a long series of accomplishments, swimming, rope tying. He mentioned a dozen of them, but I've forgotten them. It made the kids at camp much more enthusiastic and cooperative when they had ego goals to fulfill, I'm sure, but ultimately that kind of motivation is destructive. Any effort that has self-glorification as its final endpoint is bound to end in disaster. Now we're paying the price. When you try to climb a mountain to prove how big you are, you almost never make it. And even if you do, it's a hollow victory. In order to sustain the victory, you have to prove yourself again and again in some other way. And again and again and again, driven forever to fill a false image, haunted by the fear that the image is not true and someone will find out. That's never the way. Phaedrus wrote a letter from India about pilgrimage to holy Mount Kailas, Kailas, the source of the Ganges and the abode of Shiva. Shiva? I feel like it's Shiva. High in the Himalayas, in the company of a holy man and his adherents. He never reached the mountain. After the third day, he gave up, exhausted, and the pilgrimage went on without him. He said he had the physical strength, but that physical strength wasn't enough. He had the intellectual motivation, but that wasn't enough either. He didn't think he had been arrogant, but thought that he was undertaking the pilgrimage to broaden his experience, to gain understanding for himself. He was trying to use the mountain for his own purposes in pilgrimage. 2. He regarded himself as the fixed entity, not the pilgrimage or the mountain, and thus wasn't ready for it. He speculated that the other pilgrims, the ones the ones who reached the mountain probably sensed the holiness of the mountain so intensely that each footstep was an act of devotion, an act of submission to the holiness. The holiness of the mountain infused into their own spirits enabled them to endure far more than anything he, with his greater physical strength, could take. The untrained eye, ego climber and selfless climber may appear identical. Both kinds of climbers place one foot in front of the other, both breathe in and out at the same rate. Both stop when tired, both go forward when rested, but with a difference. The ego climber is like an instrument that's out of adjustment. He puts his foot down an instant too soon or too late. He's likely to miss a beautiful passage of sunlight through the trees. He goes on with the sloppiness of his step, shows he's tired. He rests at odd times. He looks up to the trail trying to see what's ahead, even when he knows what's ahead because he just looked a second before. He goes too fast or too slow for the conditions, and when he talks, his talk is forever about somewhere else, something else. He's here, but he's not here. He rejects the here, is unhappy with it, wants to be farther up the trail, but when he gets there, will be just as unhappy because then it will be here. What he's looking for, what he wants, is all around him, but he doesn't want that because it is all around him. Every step's an effort, both physically and spiritually, because he imagines his goal to be external and distant. That seems to be Chris's problem now. Yeah. Chapter 18. There's an entire branch of philosophy concerned with the definition of quality, known as aesthetics. Its question, what is meant by beautiful? Oh, jeepers. Okay, goes back to antiquity. But when he was a student of philosophy, Phaedrus had recoiled violently from this entire branch of knowledge. He had almost deliberately failed the one course in it he had attended, and had written a number of papers subjecting the instructor and materials to outrageous attack. He hated and reviled everything. It wasn't any particular esthetician who produced this reaction to him. It was all of them. It wasn't any particular point of view that outraged him so much as the idea that quality should be subordinated to any point of view. The intellectual process was forcing quality into its servitude, prostituting it. I think that was the source of his anger. He wrote in one paper, these estheticians think their subject is some kind of peppermint bonbon they're entitled to smack their fat lips on. Something to be devoured, something to be intellectually knifed, forked, and spooned up, bit by bit, appropriate, delicate remarks, and I'm ready to throw up. What they smack their lips on is the putrescence of something they long ago killed. Jeez. Now, as the first step of the crystallization process, he saw that when quality is kept undefined by definition, the entire field called aesthetics is wiped out, completely disenfranchised, kaput. By refusing to define quality, he had placed it entirely outside the analytic process. If you can't define quality, there's no way you can subordinate it to intellectual rule. The estheticians can have nothing more to say. Their whole field definition of quality is gone. The thought of this completely thrilled him. It was like discovering a cancer cure. No more explanations of what art is. No more wonderful critical schools of experts to determine rationally where each composer has succeeded or failed. All of them, every last one of those know-it-alls, would finally have to shut up. This was no longer just an interesting idea. This was a dream. I don't think anyone really saw what he was up to at first. They saw an intellectual delivering a message that had all the trappings of a rational analysis of a teaching situation. They didn't see he had purpose completely opposite to any they were used to. He wasn't furthering rational analysis, he was blocking it. He was turning the method of rationality against himself, turning it against his own kind in defense of an irrational concept, an undefined entity called quality. He wrote, number 1, every instructor of English composition knows what quality is. Any instructor who does not should keep this fact carefully concealed, for this would certainly constitute proof of incompetence. Number 2, any instructor who thinks quality of writing can and should be defined before teaching it and should go ahead and define it. Number 3, all those who feel that quality of writing does exist but cannot be defined, that quality should be taught anyway, can benefit by the following method of teaching pure quality in writing without defining it. We'll leave it there. Don't go hang, you mean a good chance. Meet again, love you, mean it.